Good evening, and welcome to our continuing conversations. My name is Joyce Trotman Jordan, and I'm on the board of Not in Our Town Princeton. And tonight, we're having a wonderful discussion. But before we begin, I'd like to read our land acknowledgement. The land in which we are living is part of the ancient homeland and traditional territory of the Lenni Lenape people. We pay respect to the Lenni Lenape people, past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in their homeland and in the diaspora. We also acknowledge the millions of enslaved Africans and their descendants on whose backs the wealth of this nation was created. Not in Our Town Princeton is a multiracial, multi-faith group of individuals who stand together for racial justice and inclusive communities. Our focus is to promote the equitable treatment of all and to uncover and confront white supremacy, the system that facilitates the preference, privilege, and power of white people at the expense of non-white people and pits racial and ethnic groups against each other by upholding hierarchies based on the proximity to whiteness. Our goal is to identify and expose the political, economical, and cultural systems that have enabled white supremacy to flourish and to create new structures and policies which will ensure the equitable which will ensure equity and inclusion for all in our communities, and to uncover and the blight of white supremacy on our humanity. We must take responsibility to address it and eliminate it in all its forms through intentional actions, starting with ourselves and our communities. I'm going to introduce Connie this evening, who will introduce our guest speaker. Connie?
Hi, Joyce. Actually, I didn't know I was going to be introducing them.
Oh, so sorry.
I think I'm going to be doing it.
Yeah, Sindhu is doing it, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, my bad, Sindhu. Thank you.
No worries, no worries. So thank you for Joyce. And first of all, I'd like to thank Kani, who was instrumental in working with Thenmozhi to make this meeting happen. So thank you, Kani. It is my pleasure to introduce Dalit American activist and author Thenmozhi Soundararajan for our session today. As a South Asian Indian, caste is part of my privilege, my heritage as well. Caste-based discrimination and oppression continue to be faced by the lower castes, especially the Dalit communities, who were classified as outcasts in the Hindu caste hierarchy. Caste-based discriminations continue not only in India, they're carried over by the Indian diaspora into other countries, and the US is no exception. Similar to race and white supremacy, many of those privileged in this hierarchy don't acknowledge the existence of discrimination or, at best, consider it ancient history. Thenmozhi Soundararajan is a Dalit civil rights activist, artist, organizer, and theorist. She has worked with hundreds of organizations to better understand the urgent issues of racial, caste, and gender equity. Working across disciplines, she is an innovative strategist and thinker that has built bridges between many communities around the world. Through her work at Equality Labs, Thenmozhi has mobilized the South Asian American community to confront their historical trauma and to break the silence about caste and to commit to ending caste apartheid, gender-based violence, white supremacy, and religious tolerance. Thenmozhi previously co-founded Third World Majority, an international media training organization and collective that supported people from disenfranchised groups. Her intersectional, cross-pollinating work, research, education, art, activism, and digital security helps to create a more generous, global, expansive, and inclusive definition of South Asian identity, along with safe spaces from which to honor the stories of these communities. With that, I'll turn it over to Thenmozhi.
Oh, thank you so much for such a lovely introduction and so glad to be here with everybody. I know this is such a challenging historical moment, and the fact that so many of you gathered for an opportunity to think deeply about the systems that separate us and ways that we might come together is just really wonderful. And I'm so honored to spend this time also with you guys as well. So, part of what we're going to do is we're going to go into an exploration about global caste systems and how they operate in the US. And my goal is that you will walk away from this conversation with a little bit more information to think about how this might be operating in your neck of the woods, and also ways that we can really be able to build power collectively around all of the different issues that are connected in this. That separate us as we work to bring unity overall. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And, I think you guys should all be able to see this. And let me know if there are any issues, because once I am in the screen, I can no longer see the chat. So through this conversation, I'll also be stopping to see if people have any questions. And if in this period you do, just feel free to unmute yourself, or I can ask someone to read out the chat if someone types it in there. Okay, so we'll go ahead and begin. So much of what I'm going to be sharing today, you can go even deeper into my book, The Trauma of Caste. And one of the reasons why I wrote this book is that even though caste is one of the largest systems of exclusion today, and it is very active and alive in the state of New Jersey and across the United States, it's a system of exclusion very few people know about. And if they have heard about it, they go back and think about some vague history lesson they may have had when they were in sixth grade, but it's not living and breathing and in people's awareness as it should be. And part of it has to do with the extensive amount of silencing and gaslighting that happens when people talk openly about caste. So, even creating a space like this where we can have open conversations about this issue is tremendously healing and creates a deep level of opening for people who have been hidden in the shadows for many, many years. Now, I think that, just so that we're all on the same page, I wanted to give us a shared definition for which we can work with. So, when we talk about caste, again, we're talking about systems of exclusion that affects over 1.9 billion people worldwide. And these systems rank people at birth, with one's caste determining every aspect of their life, from their job, where they can live, whom they marry, even whom they worship. And for people who are from a South Asian American background, we come from one of the oldest caste systems, the South Asian caste system. However, I think it's very important, especially as you're thinking about ways to incorporate a caste equity lens to the work that you guys are doing in Princeton. It is important to know that these systems that are known as systems that are based on discrimination, based on dissent and work, they can be found actually in many regions around the world. And so similar systems exist in South America, Japan, Korea, and even parts of Africa. So, what we've seen in New Jersey is that there are encasted systems that we've seen in African immigrant communities that organizations like Baji have spoken to us about. We've also seen immigrants that beyond South Asia from these other backgrounds, as well as indigenous people speaking about the American legal system as a caste system for them, because they are the original inhabitants of this geography. So I think when you talk about building a caste equity lens to your work, you're basically thinking about ways that you can help people who are facing internal discrimination within their racial categories in a very deep and profound way. And as you start to use the word caste, as you start to build with other people around this issue, you'll find many, many people around you are encasted. They just haven't broken the silence about it because they didn't know whether or not your organization or your community was a safe space. And so that's part of the reason why we have conversations like this, is so that we can actually, be able to build bridges around these historical systems. And just to give an example of many different
Thenmozhi,
kinds of,
can I
yes.
are you displaying anything on your screen? Because we're not seeing anything.
I'm seeing it, Sindhu.
Ah, okay.
I'm
All right.
also seeing it.
All right, super. That's my
Sindhu, what are you
Okay.
seeing?
It's a black screen I'm seeing.
Oh yeah, no, I'm showing my slide deck.
Oh, great.
I'm wondering if maybe you have to like change the window or something.
Let me do that. Let me look into it. Thanks.
Okay. And I can also make sure that this slide deck is available to you guys afterwards, so you don't feel like you may have missed out either, Sindhu. So just know that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So going back to global caste systems, I wanted to show this this slide that actually shows the many different caste systems that exist around the world. So for example, over here you have the Nepali caste system, in which you have, Brahmins and upper caste people who are at the top. And then you have, different layers of spiritual purity and um, professions that they have that are less and less considered pure at the bottom, until you get to the very bottom, which is where there's a group of people called untouchable. And again, the Nepali caste system is very similar to the caste system you find in India. And the idea that people are untouchable is because they are seen to be spiritually defiling to the touch, because of their profession, the family that they're born into, and therefore they are to be exploited and faced unspeakable violence. So this pattern of where you have people at the top creating a social fiction that then define the roles of society, the levels of structural power and access, are very known to us in the United States, right? That's the exact kind of pattern and social fiction that white supremacy has created and racializing us, right? So throughout history and throughout geographies, we have similar caste systems. So this blue pyramid right here is the caste system found in the Spanish colonies. So you have the people at the top who are seen as the peninsulares, or the people who are from Europe. And then as you go down, you have the mixing of Spanish blood with indigenous blood, until at the very bottom you have indigenous people and you have those that were enslaved. Similarly, on the left side, you have this graphic right here of the Japanese caste system that occurred during, Shogun times, and you have caste systems within Muslim cultures, and then caste systems in, the Philippines, which is very similar to the process. So I just wanted to show this, is that it's not about one religion, it's not about one context. It's about a pattern that has been set into motion in multiple geographies, with the idea of the social fiction animating those divisions. And I think for being an organization that is committed to equity amongst all groups, it's one of the reasons why you want to add caste to your list of other protected categories. Because again, oftentimes, racial categories aren't sufficient to really understand the internal divisions that exist, like caste, that immigrant communities or indigenous communities might be struggling with, because it doesn't fit within a racial category, because it's about internal discrimination based on these internal social fictions that divide people by profession and by purity. Now, I am an expert in the South Asian caste system. So I'm going to spend the rest of my lecture really talking a little bit about the South Asian caste system. So I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page when we're talking about South Asian Americans, because a lot of times when people think about the South Asian community, they often are thinking about immigrants who are from India and often are only of one religious background, primarily Hindu. But in fact, South Asian Americans are a much more diverse racial category. We are immigrants who come from multiple countries of origin, including Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar. And also we have communities that are indentured, meaning they were brought over through the indentured slave system to colonies in the Caribbean, in Fiji, and in parts of Africa. And so they're called Indo-Fijian and Indo-Caribbean communities. And the tri-state area has a huge Indo-Caribbean community as well. So caste operates very rampantly throughout immigrants from this region. And it's why it's really important to kind of know that, when we're talking about how bad this system is, again, in the world, it's 1.9 billion, but with just the South Asian caste system, we're talking about people who are 5.7 million Americans. And oftentimes, South Asian Americans are very critical voting blocks in purple states and in purple districts. So these internal divisions of caste can often play a role in how the kind of political norms of a state, which is why we want to kind of pay attention with what's going on related to caste. Now, I think that, for a group that's dedicated to justice and equity, another way to look at caste oppression and the questions of caste equity is that it's worker oppression, and that in many ways, some of the most vulnerable workers in multiple industries are caste oppressed workers. And that's why we're asking to make caste a protected category. And, I wanted to give a short history of the timeline of caste discrimination in the US, because I think that's really important to kind of know how long it's been operating in North America and also how crucial it is to really stop this issue. So, the first known documented, practice of untouchability happened in the early 1900s. And in the Pacific Northwest, you had Punjabi workers that were working all the way from Canada to the US in the lumber mills that, eventually set the foundation for all of the big West Coast cities like Vancouver, Seattle, Oregon. And, with those Punjabi workers, they would all live together in like a bunkhouse, and they were often all South Asian outfits. So, what would happen is that there's a documented case of a worker who was Dalit, and, a mid level manager of one of these mills came up to this person and asked him why was he sleeping on the floor and why was he eating separately. And he said, "Oh, all of the other workers will not let me bunk with them and will not let me eat with them because I am untouchable." So that led to this whole issue of them having to integrate the workforce. And that story was documented as part of the Canadian archives of those first immigrants. And it is the first known case of untouchability in the workplace. And it's a good reminder to know that even though we're talking about it more openly now, from the beginning of South Asians coming to the United States, there has been caste active in our workplaces. So, and then when you jump ahead to the year 2000, in the city of Berkeley in California, the second largest landlord was this guy named Lucky Bali Reddy. And he ended up trafficking 300 workers, including 20 young girls, to be his sex slaves from his village to work in his building and multiple businesses. And he was caught because one of the girls that was his sex slave died in one of his units, and they tried to smuggle her body out. And what they ended up doing was, as they were, carrying the rug that had her body, they were walking outside the door and trying to push it into a truck, and they dropped the rug. The body rolled out into the street. And from that, a bystander called the police and said, "You're not going anywhere. We need to find out what's going on." And that exposed the entire operation. And after several years, there was a conviction, and he was the first person to be convicted for trafficking and, for trafficking, and also to be convicted that on the basis of caste. And because of that case, it actually set into place the trafficking laws that we've seen around the country, because this was one of the first trafficking cases that documented the need for that legislative policy. So again, as I shared earlier, caste oppressed issues in the workplace, like caste oppressed workers are often the canaries in the coal mine because we are some of the most vulnerable to exploitation because of the ways that we're immigrated, because of the ways that we're treated. So again, if we solve for the problems that we're bringing up, we're actually going to create a safer community overall, you know. And then I think there is another critical case that happened in the year 2006, where again, another set of 500 workers were trafficked for a marine company that was, set to reconstruct, Houston and, the different areas that were impacted by Hurricane Katrina. And, they won an epic $20 million settlement for the company for the way that they were trafficked and the conditions in which they were kept. So, this theme of trafficking, this theme of workers being discriminated against is a really critical one that we just have to kind of keep looking at when we talk about caste discrimination. And then also in the year 2020, the California Department of Fairness in Housing and Education, now known as the California Department of Civil Rights, they sued the Cisco Corporation in the first time in American history for creating a casteist workplace. And this case is still working its way through the courts. But, in the wake of this case, thousands of caste oppressed workers in multiple industries came out saying that they had experienced this. So it's a pretty serious issue. And shortly after this came out, um, in the state of New Jersey, which is, obviously of concern for you guys, there was a temple called the Baptist Temple that actually had trafficked workers as well in the state. And it's gone, the case is now with the FBI under investigation. And there's 5 different temples that are now involved in this trafficking process. But the Baptist Temple has been alleged by these workers for, bringing workers here, holding on to their passports, and then making them live in trailers without adequate bathrooms, without adequate food, and calling them things like and other insults, while also committing wage theft. And there's been several major articles about it. Again, this case is still working its way through investigation, but you can see these cases are just the tip of the iceberg. And it's part of the reasons why you have so many South Asian organizers working to build power on this issue, because again, it's very significant acts of discrimination with some of the most vulnerable immigrant groups, but with very little understanding within community institutions to understand how serious this is, and that if the workplaces are vulnerable to this level of exploitation, all workers in all communities are going to be vulnerable. And this is one of the reasons why in my organization, Equality Labs, we have created some very powerful documentation about how bad, so we could quantify the problem. And in 2016, we conducted the first survey to document caste discrimination in the United States. And we found that 2 out of 3 caste oppressed people reported being treated unfairly in the workplace. And 1 out of 3 educational discrimination, and we also found that 1 in 4 faced physical assault due to discrimination. So the statistics were very serious, and when brought up to people, they were like, "Oh, you mean this is all happening in the in India, right?" And I would have to say, "No, this is happening in the U.S." And I can personally attest to some of the testimonies I've received, but there have been people who have been called slurs in their workplaces, faced physical assault in their places of worship and in their neighborhoods. We even, interviewed this one woman in California, one person who was part of a religious community in Sacramento who witnessed a woman being set on fire because her caste identity was found out. And this woman was disappeared, after she made a complaint because of how heinous the crime was. So we know that it's here in the US. We know that it's very serious, and we want to be able to kind of make some structural interventions around it. And, to give you, another set of data, because I'm sure in New Jersey, like in many other states, is another really important sector. And in the tech sector, we found that 40% of the tech workers that we interviewed face some form of caste discrimination. And that, of the tech companies that, were listed, despite such a high level of discrimination, 95% of tech companies do not list caste as a protected category. And, despite the fact that an overwhelming majority of workers want to add caste in all of their non-discrimination policies. So it is something we really, really have to work on. And I feel very honored in terms of the work that we've done in Equality Labs, is that we have been able to work with workers across many industries to help people add caste as a protected category. And it might feel like, well, is it really all that important? Like, isn't it already covered by the law? And I think one of the challenges that people keep bringing up is that when it's not listed and people bring up a complaint to HR, the issue is that people say, oh, it's not covered, or, it's actually interpersonal conflict. This isn't a real issue. And, explicitness in the policy makes a huge difference and protects many, many workers, as well as creates a welcoming environment for workers who may be in the closet because of fear of being outed, you know. And one worker kind of really kind of put it in a very like poignant way: why would I even report to HR when they probably don't even know where India is on the map? So that lack of cultural competency is a huge barrier for people feeling safe in their processes. So I just wanted to give an example of some of the things people are talking about when they talk about having caste in the workplace. So again, a common usage of caste slurs and insults, bullying and harassment, discrimination in housing, discrimination in dining. There are attempts to out people's identity. There might be casteist professors or experts that are brought in, sexual harassment, retaliation, and demoralization, and even direct firing. So it is very serious, and this leads to a lot of serious impacts in terms of caste stress. So this includes the stress of being fearful and anxious, frustrated and helpless, difficulties with concentration, difficult in terms of being an outsider. Sometimes people suffer from imposter syndrome. And it's not just industries like tech that have this. The universities are a huge side of this. And so, again, we've heard from both faculty and students about the challenges people have faced. And it's just really, really important to know that all of the institutions that you guys are working on do have people and community members that are impacted by caste. And we really have to stop this from moving forward, you know. Whoops. And so I think, I'm going to stop. Whoops. Can I move forward here? Okay, I'm going to just stop right here. So I think part of the thing that I wanted to just leave people with is that, learning about a problem is only one step in kind of being able to solve this issue. The next step is really being able to consider the ways that this issue operates inside of your own community, and ways that you can actually make an effort to be part of the solution. And one of the things I could really recommend is that, one, if you have a list of protected classes in your code of conduct or in your cultures of belonging, add caste to the list of those protected classes. That's a really simple thing that anyone can do for your organizations. And when doing that, it makes a huge difference in terms of people feeling welcome, and knowing that you guys consider this as serious of an issue as many of the other issues that you guys might be working on. The second thing is that every April is Dalit History Month, and it's a month where we celebrate the pride of different caste equity kind of civil rights leaders across many different generations. And so if you have an ability to do so, I encourage you guys to use April as a time to mobilize for caste equity. Consider bringing caste oppressed speakers to come and speak to your group. Maybe even have a public forum in collaboration with the university about the questions of caste. I also think there's some beautiful movies that you can watch that can also, have a viewing party so that you can build more knowledge on this issue. I think the point is that we want to bring sunshine to where there's been a tremendous amount of dark of gaslighting and dark, and be able to also link caste to all of the other struggles and issues that we work on. And, I don't think that, it can sometimes feel really intimidating when you're learning about a new system of discrimination, but no one has to be a historical expert when it comes to caste to know that injustice is wrong and that we have to do something about it. So I'm going to stop right here because I know that we want to have time for discussion and for questions. But I really thank you guys for being able to share some of this important topics, and would love to kind of hear from you all now that I've had a chance to share my thoughts.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions? Please feel welcome to put them in the chat or to raise your hand.
I'm sorry, I'm not able to raise the hand on the computer.
That's
Can
okay.
I have a minute?
Yes,
Thank you.
you have a question?
I'm from South India, Tamil Nadu, and I have been here for more than 50 years in the United States. I'm a retired doctor. I'm trying to explain the caste to a lot of people they cannot understand. So I tell them the sculptor who works on the stone to make the statue works hard. But once the statue is done and placed in the temple, he cannot go in there or he cannot touch the statue. That is how bad the discrimination is. Untouchable, even unseeable people were there. We have to go to the root of this and solve it at the international level. And I want to ask Thenmozhi, where is it in the United Nations to bring this problem? And I think the caste should be eliminated on an international level and not put ointment and think it will go away. Where are we in United Nations in this respect?
Thank you so much for bringing that. And I wanted to also give some context to what the doctor's comments so that people really understand the specificity of the violence of this system. So as I mentioned earlier, caste systems are based on this idea that there's a social and that helps to put some people at the top and other people at the bottom. And the South Asian caste system is one of the oldest dominator systems. It kind of set up the pattern of discrimination that we've come to see elsewhere in the world. And, what's specific about it is it's a spiritual kind of a system. So as you see the pyramid, and I touched upon it with the Nepali caste system, is that at the very top, you have a caste that are known as Brahmins or the priests. And the reason why they are at the top is because this social fiction was actually written by the priests to create a spiritual justification for the exploitation of others within the original Hindu scriptures. So caste has its origins in Hindu scripture, but now it's found across many different faiths, across many different South Asian geographies. So as you go down in this pyramid, you have different professions and lowering levels of spiritual purity. So underneath the priests, you have the warriors or the kshatriyas. You then have the merchants who are the vaishyas or the there. And then you have the peasants who are the shudras. And then outside of this entire caste system are the communities that are completely broken away because they are seen as spiritually defiling to other people. So the untouchables, as the doctor was speaking about, were the people, who I'm untouchable, except we don't use that term because it's a slur, because we were seen as untouchable or outcast or unclean because we were seen to be spiritually defiling towards God because of something that we had done in our past life. And that's the entire justification for this caste system, is that you are in the social role that you're in because of something you did in a past life. So if you're born in the upper caste, you were great in the last life, and that's why you're being blessed with being in an upper caste. But if you are a Shudra or a Dalit, you basically sinned in your last life, and therefore you are sentenced to exclusion, brutality, exploitation, and violence. And you can't organize around it. Otherwise, you're not fulfilling your sentence. So there's a terrible carceral logic to justifying your exploitation in this life. And that's the pain what the doctor was speaking about, is that they might exploit us to build the labor in a temple, but once that temple has been built, we're not allowed in there because of the prohibition related to caste. And so this social fiction is just as violent as race, has created such a deep level of structural violence that there has been many different processes at the UN to try to get caste recognized. And currently, if you look at the UN Rapporteur on Racism, it is currently held by a Dalit woman. Her name is Ashwini KP, and she has reminded the mandate, as the mandate holder, many of the different countries that caste is currently covered under Article 29 in the Covenant Against Racial Discrimination, and the US is a signatory to that. So based on that, there continues to be ongoing advocacy, and we have to just keep continuing to lift that up. And there are many different countries around the diaspora that are talking about the way that caste is showing up. And most recently, the Australian government is being served with a report about caste discrimination that was conducted by the lawyer, and it's being presented by that office. So there is a lot of work that has been done, and there's more work that needs to be done. But it's absolutely a vital, issue that we need to have addressed by the global community, because it's not thousands of lives at risk, it's hundreds of millions of lives at risk. And so it's very, very serious.
Thank you so much. We do have a hand raised, but I wanted to lift up a question from the chat because it might be a quick response. They say, you mentioned that there are movie titles that you recommend for those of us that want to learn more about this discussion. May you please share the movie titles?
Sure. I mean, there's most recently a film by Ava DuVernay called Origin about global caste systems, which I think could be very powerful. There's also a really amazing Tamil film director called Pa Ranjit, who has lots of great movies about caste that you can share and take a look at. They're available on Netflix, so you guys could do like a viewing session. And there's some other documentaries that I can share with you as well. But I'm telling you, as soon as you start going down the rabbit hole, and of course, Isabel Wilkerson's book on caste is another really great one to read together. I feel like you could do like back to back, like read my book, read Isabel Wilkerson's book, and you'd have like a really good, profound background. And I'm happy to share as a with Kani, a list of, books and things to read. And if you guys decide that you want to do something for Dalit History Month, we can kind of help you guys think about a speaker, an appropriate panel, or some things to do that might be fun for the community. Because again, with all communities that face systemic discrimination, we're more than our oppression, right? There's joy, there's resilience, there's power, and learning about that and connecting to that can be so profoundly inspiring,
Great, thank you so much. I think the first person to have their hand raised was Shanmugh Sankaran.
Hey, congrats, Thenmozhi. So,
Hi, nice to
hi.
see you.
Nice to see you again. So, you guys have been doing great Samaritan work on caste enlightenment around America. Particularly SB 403, you guys did a great work putting in the entire Dalit community together. My question is, now we are in election season. Why there is this still lacuna and lack of understanding with respect to caste on the political quarters? Maybe Democrats are supposed to be the friends of Dalits, at least in the American context. So, but when it came to SB 403, it was a big disappointment. So, also, I am not so sure about the Republican world. So, what are you guys doing as a Dalit community to keep this political conversations going on, to enlighten about this importance of the caste with respect to the Indian diaspora?
Well, I think that fundamentally, the thing I think that I see what happens during electoral season is that, the internal divisions of communities becomes the rifts that get exploited by bad actors, right? So for every progressive BIPOC community, you'll see their counter in a right-wing stakeholder that's exploiting some sort of longstanding rift between core communities. And I think that is what caste is. Caste is a very weaponizable rift that I think bad actors are always trying to exploit, particularly around electoral season. And so I think our goal is not to give attention to those rifts, but actually to build an alternative vision of power building and solidarity. And so I think that's our long-term vision, is to kind of say, love is ultimately more compelling than hate. People do not want to stay in an extended period of conflict. So can we show another way of coming together, another way of, finding hope and opportunity with each other? So I think that's going to be our focus for the next year, as well as continuing to work to build more and more cities and counties and state that add caste as a protected category. So if you guys know of a city or a county, or think you guys would like to help work to add caste as a protected category, let us know. We'd love to equip you with a campaign and help make it happen.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much. Noga Collins?
Hello. I seek advice from you. I'm working for a high-tech company, and we have a group that we are calling ourselves partners of inclusion and equality. And we had a member that wanted to discuss the book Caste by Isabel Wilkinson. And we started having sessions, and one of our members that is from India pretty much brought the discussion to a halt. Not surprisingly, he's from the higher caste. He brought somebody else that was his backup and basically said that we don't understand, we don't have enough background, we don't have enough knowledge to talk about it, that he feels uncomfortable, unsafe, bullied, and he would go to HR and complain about our activities. And there was a proposal to let him have a session where he can explain if he thought that this was not, balance or not the truth. There were disclaimers, and he would just do nothing. And basically, we had to shut down the discussion, and HR told us drop it, right? If I would like to go to my company and say, EdCast is a protected group, how do I do it when we have internal people that may be fighting it?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much for even trying to have a conversation like this in your company. And I want to tell you that you're not alone. This happens all the time. And we're actually in a moment of great bigotry, right? There's no other way to say it. So I think that, it's very interesting that when we don't actually work on our capacity for discomfort, we can't actually change the systems that we're in, because even though we can have logical tools, we can have books that share history, we can have, workbooks and worksheets that help break down systems of oppression. But if the nervous systems of the privileged are not trained to accommodate the discomfort of the fragility, then we just keep recreating the patterns of trauma and harm. And that's actually one of the reasons why I wrote this book, is that, myself, alongside other racial thinkers, we understand that learning the facts is only one part of the problem. Retraining our minds and bodies and nervous systems to handle the discomfort with understanding the totality of this violence is the other. And I would say that there are a couple of things I would do before, when you know that you have, one or two individuals that are willing to kind of weaponize HR to stop a conversation related to equity. You want to make sure that you have enough workers alongside you that are allies to equity, who can help you think about other ways to bring this forward. Again, asking them to add caste as a protected category is not changing the law. It's simply extending what is existing protections. But you can also ask them, can we have speakers related to caste? Can we watch movies related to caste? And if they continue to build a pattern of not wanting to represent or create space, that in and of itself is an HR violation of themselves, because they're not actually creating a conducive space for all workers. But I think that a lot of these conversations will take on a different conversation depending on the transfer of power and who comes to office. How we have these conversations will be really different if Harris is in office versus even if we can have these conversations, Trump comes into office, right? So I think we're dealing with two very different realities where we'll have to think about tactical strategies afterwards. And I'm happy to follow up, once we kind of know which direction we're in. But my general answer to your question would be, find other workers who are interested, see if you can approach it as a group as opposed to being an individual, and then see if you can try to find a pathway to that.
Thank you so much. I'd like to give Sonam Sankar the last question, and then Sindhu, I think, also has a question and is going to help us transition into the breakout session.
Hi, thank you, Thenmozhi. It was a very good summary of caste in North America. My question is about the younger generation who are growing up in this country. So when I have interacted with a lot of the children who are growing up here or who are studying in college, either there are two groups. They simply say they don't recognize caste as an issue because they say it's not practiced in my family here, or the second set of people, they consider that as a caste is like a cultural group, right? They, whatever the practices they are following at home, they think it's part of their culture. So a couple of years back, I mean, it was in 2020 when Black Lives Matter agitations were going on. That was the first time a lot of the South Asian community associations popped up in the college campuses, and I attended a few of their Zoom sessions. And even I asked this question, some of them, they said they really apologized that they don't know that, caste issue exists here. And they also say that whenever they go back to India to visit their families, they don't even know anything about it. So the question is, how do we bring the awareness to the college children here, because that's the time they really start questioning even their family, whatever they preached in their family. So is it somewhere we can organize such sessions in college associations and campuses?
Yeah, we definitely do a lot of work doing educational conversations in colleges. Like, I know for my book, I did close to like 35 talks in universities across the country last year alone. So there is a deep hunger for this. And we, and again, universities have also been some of the most defining places where caste is being discussed. So we currently have excuse me, 40 universities across the country who have added caste as a protected category, and 100 new other universities that are working to add it as we're going. So college students are definitely having this conversation, but I think the key, especially for groups like this, is you want those college students to be part of your broader organizing as well. So this might be a really good cross-collaboratory effort to think about ways to build local campaigns in all the places that you operate, and then make sure that students are part of it. But I would say usually there are supportive faculty that can help bridge a connection to a student group, or students themselves that are passionate about this. And together you're able to work together on this. But we have a university working group that basically works on building power at universities. And that's a place where we can kind of, try to find those next steps.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sindhu?
Yeah. So, what sorts of resistance have you faced when you've tried to do this? Because I know the California SB 403 went very far. I mean, you got approval from both the legislative bodies, but then Gavin Newsom shut it down vetoed it. So how does the resistance manifest?
Well, like any system of exclusion, there is a well-heeled opposition that's connected to historical bigotry. And certainly in this country, there are a lot of caste bigoted people that are afraid of the teaching of caste because it exposes how much their privilege is based on violence. And I think, similar to the earlier speaker, even talking about caste, they start to, use language like, oh my God, like I'm being bullied for bringing this up. This doesn't exist. And we've certainly seen this conversation with race, right? We've seen certain white supremacists meltdown the minute you talk about the origins of slavery and what happened at the founding of our nation. So I just think that it's really, really important for us to continue, and with our opposition, they are coordinated, they are very wealthy, and they're not afraid to use violence. So for example, many people may have heard, like in this call, you may have heard of the bill that we ran in California called SB 403. And it was a bill to add caste to the protected categories in California. And in that work, I know that when I was, in line to give, expert testimony, I was assaulted. My ACL was torn, my shoulder was impinged. We had people followed by private, followed by, thugs from their cars into their homes. Other forms of kind of intimidatory tactics like happened all throughout that cycle. And then of course there was just blatant corruption, money being used to buy votes. And ultimately the reason why Newsom, vetoed the bill wasn't because of lawful reasons, but it was because these donors said, if you want to ever be in a presidential race and want the support or our money, you have to make sure to veto this bill. And so he vetoed it. And the reason why we know this is that these people were so corrupt, they broadcast their strategy and their conversation with Newsom on social media. That's how crazy it was. So, again, bigots operate like that because they operate in very impugn ways, right? They don't believe in the rule of law. And that's why I think for those of us that are committed to justice and equity, we have to commit to the rule of law. We have to build power in that way. And that's a big reason, while we lost the ultimate process with that veto, the fact that we got it through both houses on the first try is pretty incredible. And that act actually went on to influence judicial decisions because a judge ruled that caste is covered as a protected category because it's very clear the intentions of the legislature that it is. And this bill was a citation towards that. So all battles for civil rights require an upward climb, but so we will get there. But it's just a challenge. We just need to know and see, But thank you for that question.
Thank you.
So thank you everyone for coming back into the room. Shelley is here and she's going to sort of bring us all back together once we're fully back in the room and help summarize, invite people to help summarize the discussion.
Thank you, everyone, again, for taking time out of your evening to learn with us about this vital topic. And thanks also to Thenmozhi for her perspective, wisdom, and experience. I would love to hear if folks have something on their heart coming out of the small group conversations that they feel it would be helpful for the broadest possible group of us gathered here this evening to hear. Please take a moment to share with us that piece that's particularly resonant for you. And you can just unmute.
I was just telling the group why this has not come out in the open, why it is under the rug. Because the people who are in power, they come from the upper caste. They control everything. They control the academic institutions, political power, financial power, big companies, corporate CEOs, they are in everywhere. So other people from the lower caste, they're afraid to open their mouth and talk about it. That is, I'm talking about the United States. This is much worse in India. But even in the United States, people are afraid to talk about this. That is the problem. They are afraid of the recriminations.
Thank you. Does anyone else have something that they feel the broader group would benefit from hearing?
I think one of the things that we talked about is how similar these oppressions are across. It doesn't matter whether it's race or caste or whatever it is, the forms of oppression keep taking the same way. The hate, the tropes, everything is, it's so similar. Even though it originated in so many different places. I think Natalie said we human beings are pretty similar in how we do things. So that's kind of one of those things that, I mean, and the other part is the caste washing, if you please. It's not so bad. Even the original thing of caste, that there weren't that many discriminations. A lot of those things, sound very familiar.
The minimizing.
The other thing I want to bring about is not only the superior caste, the other caste in between, in between Dalits and the real upper caste. These people make their own group of called Sangams. They make their own organizations. And then they start doing like marriages between their children and job. They find job for each other. All those things. They are pretty comfortable in that smaller groups. So they don't feel that they need to help the suppressed people. So it's very selfish, small groups they are, and they are making everything silent. So that's a difficult part to deal with these people, to talk about caste, because they are pretty happy with their small groups, and they don't want to expose the problems. So that's another thing I want to mention.
Yeah, if you're benefiting from the system as it currently stands, if you experience it as something that's benefiting you. Yeah. Anyone else have a small sharing that you'd like to lift up?
Okay, so my small sharing is the whole notion of shame and vulnerability. People who feel almost, I hate to say, like less worthy, will and carry all this shame with them. And if connecting it with spirituality, it's kind of like I did something so terrible that I brought this on myself. I can use my own self as an example. Well, growing up,
I thought that I was the problem with racism, that I caused my own grief and shame because I was such a bad person. And that's awful. So I do worry about the children of what can I say, for lower caste systems. How do they grow up and what do they feel like?
Thank you, Auntie Joyce.
I don't know.
Thank you. Thenmozhi, did you want to chime in?
Definitely, and I've appreciated all of the previous comments as well. And I think that one of the challenges that I see is that there is such a lack of empathy for the suffering that comes from
Yes.
dominator systems. Because a lot of times we talk about systems like race, like systems like class, through the realm of logic. Like, oh, here are these data points. These are these bad things that have happened. But behind every statistical number is a heart, is a body, is a spirit, is a psyche that's been damaged. And it's the nature of human consciousness that we cannot hold the totality of that suffering. So rather than not be able to hold it, we just ignore it.
Mm.
And I think that in some ways, healing really begins with acknowledging that suffering is there and understanding what our own legacies of suffering are. And, in writing that book, like that, there are so many really amazing people here who are speaking to what caste is. These are folks who have seen it and are speaking from a place of pain, because it's extremely difficult to watch a society ripped apart by this. It's also extremely difficult if you are in the body of an oppressed person, because you have that being in the body of an oppressed person under any dominator system has lots of,
Dad say that I was stupid.
it can be sorry, I think someone might be is it possible to mute that person?
Yep, sorry.
Oh, okay, perfect. No problem. So I think one of the challenges I see is that any dominator system, the bodies of the oppressed and the bodies of the privileged are linked. And in the bodies of the oppressed, like what Joyce was speaking to, there is the trauma of gaslighting. There is the trauma of wounds that are never recognized. And there is, I just think about how, during the George Floyd protests, you had Black folks that had to go into work while every day you're seeing a murder on the screen, as if you can't acknowledge that murder is happening everywhere that you go. It is a very similar thing for caste oppressed people. We are expected to go into workplaces and our jobs and have a totally normal life experience, even though we know our people are being murdered and lynched and raped every day. And we don't know if there will be consequences to speaking out, as someone else on this call spoke to, where even speaking about the fact that it exists will be treated as bullying by people of privilege, right? So the trauma for bodies of oppressed is like the challenge of just even being able to sit with the rehumanization of what it means to acknowledge that we have pain in the first place, because society doesn't allow us to have pain. If they allow us to have pain, they have to acknowledge that there is harm, right? So being able to claim the space to grieve, to understand that there is deep consequences to systems of violence is a very first important step for bodies that are oppressed. For bodies that privilege, there's also a similar trauma, but it's the trauma of the privileged. And the trauma of the privileged is about acknowledging centuries of nervous system training has inured people to be silent and complicit with the dehumanization of other people. That does something. So when they're actually feeling discomfort at the teaching of caste, I actually totally believe it, because they've been trained in their families and in their networks to say, if you bring this up, this could threaten our privilege. So don't bring it up. Don't bring it up. Don't bring it up. Better not, see no evil, hear no evil. It doesn't exist. This is why, in the context of race, you have families in Tennessee that are trying to pass school board ordinances that say the teaching of race is traumatic to white children. No, it's not. It can be uncomfortable, but discomfort is not the same thing as harm. And I think bodies of privileged people have been trained not to make that distinction. You know, the fragility is what is so terrifying for them because they legitimately feel like equity is oppression, right? So I think that part of what we have to do and part of the important work of this group is to build enough relationships of trust and healing that people can unpack all the wounds that they carry, you know, because no one is fully oppressed and no one is fully a privileged person, right? On any given dominator system, you may be on different sides of it. But our job as individuals is to know our conditioning and then to release it. But if we are unconscious in our conditioning, we will replicate the ways we've been trained to continue cycles of harm and discrimination. And that's what we've got to do. Because there's no question a mobilized group like this can work to change policy in many different dimensions. But policy doesn't get easily changed because our own bodies and nervous systems derail it, because we are operating thoughtlessly when we actually need to be operating with more consciousness to how our training is informing the way we show up.
Thank you so much. So I think, friends, we've really had an opportunity this evening to have our eyes opened, our hearts opened to the reality that caste is such a powerful lens through which we can understand the world and through which we can also, through awareness, through resistance, build community and power. As Thenmozhi has shared with us this evening, caste bigoted people are afraid of the teaching of caste because of the light it sheds on our complicity and on how much privilege rests on violence. We can meet silence and gaslighting with empathy, with sunshine, with determination to be a part of the change we want to see. And as Thenmozhi has shared with us this evening, love is ultimately more compelling than hate. So thank you again for spending time with us this evening. We hope that you will take this learning out into your communities. Our next gathering will be on Monday, December 2nd at 7 p.m., where we'll hear from Michelle Tuck-Ponder and learn together about school equity and inequity. We want to thank, as always, our partners at the Princeton Public Library, without whom we would be seriously curtailed in our ability to do this important work. Thank you again, everyone.